Hello and welcome to another edition of One Slot. I'm Dashen Usman, sitting in for Felicity Ezewike. Now, more than anywhere else in the world, to be a woman in Africa is to endure a life marked by numerous challenges, and this is majorly because the struggle for women's rights is at a crisis point in Africa. Now, despite agreements and policies signed by governments to fix gender disparity, women remain at the bottom of the social hierarchy. Now, as we celebrate Women's Month, it is important to take stock of the persistent challenges confronting African women, from economic inequality, gender-based violence, healthcare disparities, high mortality rates, education barriers, political underrepresentation, harmful cultural practices, internalized gender stereotypes, climate change impact, lack of legal protection, and limited land ownership. These challenges underscore the need for concerted efforts to promote gender equality, empower African women, and also create a more equitable society. Now, joining me to discuss further on this is Adekunbi Ademiluyi. She's Managing Director, HumanManager. Good afternoon, ma'am. Thank you so much for joining me on One Slot.
Good afternoon. How are you?
I'm fine, thank you. All right, so now let's begin with how economic exclusion impacts African women. Now, we know that African women often face limited access to resources, financial exclusion, and also wage disparities. What prejudicial financial systems would you say sustains gender inequality, and how can they be reformed to empower women economically?
Okay, thank you very much for having me. I think the good news is we can actually start by the regulations that have come on, and also you understanding that a whole lot of central banks in Africa as a whole have started the inclusion of females in so many services. So you start off by regulation. We can see Nigeria, for instance. I'll give you quick figures. So when we started about 2-3 years ago, we had very few ladies that were included in the financial industry. And we'll start with agency banking. So as we speak now, we have over 100,000 females that are female agents in Nigeria. Okay. And that tells you that it's actually expanding compared to the zeros that we had about 5 years ago. And going further to other countries as well, we have Liberia, we have Ghana, a whole lot of countries that have started, moving into this. Of course, we all already know the M-Pesa story in Kenya. What this has told you is that the gender bias is thinning. It's no longer like before. We also understand that other countries in Africa are also looking into the cultural side of things. Back in the day, we know that some cultures will tell you women shouldn't be educated, but you have people that are beginning to deepen. We also have the women that are beginning to shout out. We have a lot of societies and organizations that are coming out and sponsoring these women, which is helping them get included. We have vocational rallies and other services that are coming up. That has really, really helped out in so many ways. People are beginning to understand more. It all starts with us as women as well, because, unlike before, there's a bit more confidence in the woman, the way we see ourselves, the way we understand the world. And there's a bit more exposure that has come on into things now. So we're happy that this is happening, and I'm sure there's a whole lot more, but I know I can't finish everything.
Definitely. All right, now still talking about the economic challenges. When you hear about gender disparity, the first thing that comes to mind is the role that corruption actually plays in all of this, because some do see investing in women as a human rights issue, mainly because the global economic and financial systems, are not kind of wired for, to women. So do you agree with this? And how can this be, how can there be a solution to this?
Okay, so it's, like I said, the first thing I said is it's changing, which started with our culture and the evolution of the people. Corruption, we start with education and exposure. You have more women getting educated. If I'm correct, we have about 17% of the so-called 55% of women, young women in Nigeria that are now educated compared to the old figures back in the 80s, where we had just about less than 10% of the women. And then we go further to Africa as a whole. In Africa, we have an increase of more than, I think, 20% now of women that are now more educated. And when you have women that are becoming educated, that's the first level, because they actually understand that they can participate in governmental organizations, they can participate in the policy of the day, they can also educate others as well, because it's almost like a train the trainers, and they can encourage others, because when we see each other and we see the growth that we have within ourselves, we become more emboldened, we become, we feel better. It's psychological, but it happens. Then we also have our parents, and that, they say charity begins at home with us. And when you have families that are beginning to encourage their children, and they're saying, girls, you can go to school, you can go out, you can actually join this or join that, what happens is they understand that things should be done properly, not that you cut corners. Now, you also have the government, and you also have other institutions as well. So when these institutions have people that are not only unbiased, and I'm talking about not just the female, but also the male and other folks as well, when they start understanding that you can actually allow women join in, and then you can create equality. Now, equality doesn't have to be just the diversity of the day, but the equality of every service that is given to every individual in the social society. So people now understand that when there's something allocated for this service, it must be allocated. It shouldn't be diverted to something else. So corruption might not necessarily mean that the person or that institution is corrupt, but it might just mean some form of diversion as well. So we just hope that as we get exposed and as we get to understand that the female folk are important in our society, what happens is we allocate our resources properly, and then we expose our females well, and then we also have growth. Because when one individual grows, before you know what's happening, it becomes a team. And then you have more people that are growing, and we also have the growth of our society as a whole.
Okay. All right. So, I actually wanted to touch on a little about, political participation, but, you actually just discussed that as well. But let's talk about, a very, very important factor, which is girls and women in Africa encountering obstacles in accessing education and also staying in school. Now, if you come to Nigeria, you find out that a lot of girls in the north, don't have access to education due to one reason or the other. I'm talking about probably insecurity or, tradition or even cultural practices. But how can we improve access to education for girls and also ensure that they actually stay in school?
Okay, so again, we'll touch on culture, first of all. We have to ensure that, I know culture plays a big role, but culture is growing, culture is being modernized. And I like the fact that you mentioned the North. The North is improving. We have governors in the North and other regions of Africa that are realizing that you have to educate each other, because when you get educated, let's use guinea worm and ringworm. It is when we got educated, we realized that this thing is not someone doing something funny to you, but education taught us that you could actually get clean water, or you could, wash your fruits, and you could do this or do that, and it will improve you on health. So going back to that, what has happened is the society as a whole and the culture of our people, as it improves and our families encourage people, they now realize that the cultural side of things has to come out, and the exposure and the education has to come in. Now, in women participating in the governance of the day and participating in things that they ought to use to rule the day, what happens is we have the male folk. I had mentioned the governors earlier on, but also apart from the male folk, we also have societies. I don't want to mention any society in particular, but they have the leaders, which are usually men. Hopefully more women will come, like the village leaders, for instance. Now you see them being at the forefront of educating women, of registering women in vocational services, ensuring that, aid is coming to the women. And when you say aid, it's not just about aiding women for, you have things like childbirth, you have teachings, you have the societal norm, you have building, I know there was a rally that I went for that was just about cleaning the environment. It was quite interesting. They also involved art and some other things as well. And what just happened is we were able to discover some talents that we didn't even know we could find. That's why you see a lot of dyeing pits. And when I say dyeing, I mean the clothes dyeing, like Adire and co, where you have women controlling those areas. I think that's in Kano, for instance. You have the dyeing pits in Kano and a few places. Yeah.
Okay, now, when it comes to, challenges that women actually face in Africa, it seems like it's unending. Now, we actually just got done with education, and I would like for us to move into the high rates of physical, sexual, and emotional violence, affecting African women. Now, I would love for you to speak to us on the prevalence of gender-based violence and how we can combat them effectively, because whether you like it or not, these things actually happen in Africa.
Okay, so I don't want to use just Africa, it happens around the world. It's happened to me as a person. I have also, it was more verbal abuse.
I'm so sorry about that.
No, it's a workplace, it's okay. It's difficult. It was difficult along the line because I mean, I've worked for over 20 years, and in a lot of roles that I have been, you find that it's more male dominated, even in the industry that I'm in. So you find out that the men are like, why a woman? Why are you employing her? But again, education had a good role to play. We also have the governance. There's something about women trying to I believe that women should actually go more into politics. I'm not really a politician, but I hope that, women will come out and step out, probably join the policy of the day and see how they can help us, influence a whole lot of regulations and policies that will help for women as well. Now, in terms of violence, we have there are a few organizations on one side. The government has also made a few rules. There have been a few arrests on them. But the truth is, if we do not, there's also a cultural bias to it where when women are being abused, a lot of them don't come out. The truth is, if you don't come out, you can't be helped. So I know I'm on air and I have to use this to voice out to tell you that you need to speak out, because you don't want to go to work and you have this black eye, or you are not even able to work because you might just be so intelligent, but because of what's happening, you can't really speak out. We've also, I know that the government has also, and when I say government, not just the Nigerian government, but other governments as well, there are certain rules and regulations that favor both domestic violence and also verbal abuse and other abuse as well. There are other things, the therapists also, you can actually seek aid in that regard. What we can do, more, I believe, is to also use different means to actually be more vocal. Because we're talking about equality, but before we get to equality, we need to ensure that people understand their rights. So I do not think that we're doing...
Adekunbi, now talking about speaking out and, being vocal, how about other harmful practices like female genital mutilation, child marriage, and widow inheritance that very much persists? How do you think, or what measures can be implemented to eradicate them? And I know that most times these women actually go through this, because of the trauma or because of being cancelled, they're scared of coming out to speak on it.
Okay, so in that, I mentioned earlier on that you actually have to it starts with the government. And because the government has to even encourage people to be able to come out. You have the situation that we have. I know, for instance, in Lagos State, there's a lot of services. There's the social services. There's even for the Catholic Church, you have the Justice and Peace that also fights for you as well, and a whole lot more. But however, as a whole, you need to ensure that there's more regulation to it, and we also need to advertise. And when I say advertise, speak and educate people more on what their level of legal rights will be. That's one. Now, you also spoke about genital mutilation. Genital mutilation is cultural as well. I know that there's a lot going on with it. I'm aware that the UN has also spoken a lot about it. There were a few years that it was, a big deal and it was being discussed, but I don't know how well it's being discussed. I won't lie about that. However, on genital mutilation, the only thing you can do is report because it's done locally, it's not done in a hospital. And again, it's cultural, it's educational. We need to educate our people more. I had mentioned that governments are doing more in different places to see how they can push. I think we should also, as women, this is a day or this is a week because this whole week is about the woman. Also
the whole
speak
month.
about it. Yes, please.
I said the whole month is about women. It's Women's Month.
Correction noted. The whole month. Yeah. So it's much more than that. In terms of domestic violence, it's a similar case as well. For the domestic violence, it's much more because the legal system, I know that they're really fighting against this. And when I say legal, it's not just Nigeria. It's pretty sad. There's so much that the police are also doing, surprisingly. The Nigerian police, and I don't know about other police systems around the world, but I know that they're doing a lot more about it. Speaking, encouraging women. They're actually doing house visits. You are actually encouraged to report. There are also therapists and centers that have been set up around the place where you can go to. There are organizations that are doing that. They even do visits. And then in terms of registration, there are certain registration centers. I know I'm not allowed to speak about that, but there are certain registration centers where you can actually register and you'll get some form of aid that is being given. There are other things that there are certain women that there's women houses that have been set up by certain churches just to help women that have been either involved in domestic violence, rape, or other things that are not supposed to even be mentioned at all.
All right, now Adekunbi, I remember you did say that you wish more women would actually be involved in politics. So I'm going to link it to this next question, that has to do with women often being excluded from peace negotiations, or policy decision-making processes. How do you think, that our voices can be amplified as regards these processes?
The first interesting way, the easiest way to say, oh, go on the internet. But really, it's not just about you going on the internet. It's about you being organized. And I think that for women, we need to start that. We need to voice out. We need to come together. I am an advocate in some ways. We already have some societies, but at the same time, we also need to allow the women come out. This is also another plea because you have a lot of organizations too, political parties or non-political parties, and where you find out that it's not said. It's almost like a culture thing where you now find out that the women are not either. You don't have enough women in those not organizations, the political parties.
Yeah. That was actually another reason why I asked this, because during the last elections, you had so many men come out to say that they support women. Meanwhile, in their political parties, women are actually underrepresented.
Yeah, they are. Unfortunately, I'm not. I would rather say I'm non-partisan when it comes to politics, but I really do hope that we have more women that are interested in politics, because the more women you have, the better your representation, and also the better the policies that come out. I know for non-governmental organizations and private sector businesses, you see that a lot of the boards are trying to ensure that they have gender equality, and they're really coming out and explaining. Even in the financial industry and some other tech industries as well, you find out that you have a lot of grants. You have educational grants, and you also have some grants for companies where you are given a grant to just promote the female business, to showcase that, women can really do good. And I think we should do more for that. I encourage all women to really try to do that. Even though I can't really mention names, I can't do anything, but really, we should.
Okay. All right, now let's talk about statistics now. I know a lot of women have actually, gone through this one way or the other, but statistics actually have it that women make up 58% of Africa's self-employed population, but they actually make on the average of 34% less money than the men do, despite, being that self-employed. And even when you come to offices, you find out that the women are actually paid less, even if the woman does more work than the man. So how can we address the gender pay gap and promote equal pay for equal work, for both genders?
Okay, so I read a few statistics, and this is not because one has to actually look at it from a different perspective. What roles were being checked? That's the first thing you do. You find out that those jobs and those roles, most of them in those statistics don't really tally or vary. They're not equal. So it's difficult for us, even though I hear you and I'm agreeing with you in some way, but I also need to be truthful and factual. I won't call any job, but at the same time, let's weigh apple for apple rather than just say, oh, women are being marginalized.
Oh, but it does happen. It does happen in some organizations I'm aware of.
I'm guessing that's the first thing. Now, the second thing is, do you have that? Yes, we do. In fact, I know that I checked my pension. And when I checked my pension, I was surprised when I was trying to do my pension calculation. And the next thing I saw was, are you male or female? And I clicked on male first, it was like a few thousands more than what the female would get. I was really surprised. So your question is spot on, you're right. So for that, it depends on policy. If it's a public sector, that is regulated by the government and that should be changed. If it's private sector, we need to push for, if possible, a bill. I'd love to push for a bill that actually requests that females be paid equally, because they do a lot of work. I mean, even in my office, I see it happening where females do a lot of work, but we don't have that inequality problem. There are a few organizations that have that. I don't know any of them, but that's the truth. So I felt very bad when I saw that. I mean, that's why I mentioned, I felt bad about it, that, wow, it's actually telling me that if I was a guy, I'll earn more than a female. Why?
All right. Now, Adekunbi, now just before we let you go, I would love for you to speak on some of your experiences. I'm aware that you inspire women leaders, through your engagement across Africa. So what capacity building initiatives would you say are needed to advance women's rights across the continent?
So the first thing I'll say is, let's just start with being yourself. It's surprising that I would say that. A lot of people will think that it's education, but it's belief in oneself. Who are you? Who am I as an individual, and how do I see myself? What are your plans as a person? Where are you coming from? Where are you going to? And also, how do you impact the other people around you? What is the legacy that you leave behind? Who are the people that are working with you, and how do you also influence them? And how do they influence you? So when you start with yourself, it's not a selfish thing. Don't assume so. It is more of evaluating oneself into the growth phase. Now, the next level is, it depends on your level of education. And if you want to increase your education, now your education is twofold. It is going to school. Mommy, daddy sent me to school, and I sent myself to school, no problem. But there's also the societal education as well. You need to educate yourself within the environment that you're in. You need to grow yourself within the environment, and also check other environments and cultures as well.
All right, fantastic, Adekunbi. Well, I wish we could actually continue discussing this, but sadly, we'd actually have to wrap it up here. But thank you so much for joining me and speaking, and also standing in the gap for women. Adekunbi Ademiluyi, Managing Director, HumanManager. We appreciate you for your time.
Thank you. Thank you so much.